Okay, well, it looks like we're being joined by a very special guest today. This is my fur child, Button. She's just the sweetest, but also the sassiest. I am convinced that she is my karma for how I was when I was about 3 years old. But that's a story for another day. We'll see how long she sticks around before she decides that she's too cool for us, because of course she is too cool for us. She's pretty special. Okay, so today I had it on my heart to talk about what makes a great designer. So before you panic and think, oh, I'm not a designer. If you are, I guess, a designer, like a traditionally, oh wow, not impressed with her mom. I get it. So if you are a traditional designer, so let's say architect, interior designer, graphic designer, whatever, fashion designer. Oh, that didn't take long, did it? But yeah, traditional designer, cool. You're very much welcome here. I think this applies to all of us, myself included. But I'm also kind of expansive in my definition of designer. I think we're all designers all the time, whether we're conscious to it or not. I'll give you just a quick example to maybe put you at ease a little bit. You know, when you went through your closet this morning and decided what to wear, or if you were very prepared and did it last night, cool, good for you. That was design. There were choices made for a particular outcome. Sure, it might not have been based on taste. I think a lot of people get it in their head that design really is very hinged on taste, and I suppose it is, but ultimately you have an intention, you make decisions and take aligned action according to those intentions, and you get a manifested, tangible outcome. So there are days when my intention is very much, I just want to be cozy, and then I take aligned action, and usually that means with that intention, of course, and that means sweatpants and a t-shirt. And then some days I want to feel more like myself, and what does myself look like? And there's decisions that go into what clothes would bring about that feeling, right? So we're all designers all the time. I really got off on a tangent about picking out what you wear for a second there. But I think like all of life is a design. So don't feel afraid and like you're not welcome here. You very much are, and I'm so glad to have all of us here today. And I think a lot of different perspectives on this is important. So I just wanted to talk about what I think makes a great designer, and this is only going to be a couple because it's wide ranging, and honestly, like my definition of design is changing all the time. It's so different than when I even began. So I'm excited to have a conversation about this with you all today. So of course, based on my last video, which you may or may have not seen, it was about the foundation of your reality, which is ultimately your relationship with yourself, who you are at your core, that inner dynamic. I think having a solid foundation is like the first thing that makes you a great designer. So you know what your values are, you know what your intentions, your soul desires are. I think it's also important that we have this conversation with ourselves and introspect on what hills are we willing to die on, in all facets of life. Like that's where we really stand, and knowing that is important. And then I think also like another example that shows that you have this solid foundation is, for the most part, you know, we're human beings, none of us are perfect, but you act with integrity most of the time. And it's something that you strive for. So as Brené Brown puts it, and if you aren't familiar with Brené Brown, oh my gosh, totally recommend. I'm in no way affiliated with her, but her videos as well as her books have been life-changing. I'm not usually a big audiobook person, but she is one of the few that I love her audiobooks because it just feels like I'm having this wonderful, heartwarming, deep conversation with this like wonderful, sassy, funny, sweet, Texan woman. It's like the best. So would definitely recommend her books, especially like Atlas of the Heart is great for getting in tune with your emotions and the wide spectrum of emotions that you can feel and why we feel them. I think the other that I really liked is called Braving the Wild. I might be slightly wrong about that title, but it's about having the bravery to live authentically and be vulnerable and really live according to your soul, which is in some ways living alone. I don't think it has to be that way, but ultimately that path is a difficult one and it can feel isolating, but it also brings about really deep, meaningful connections with others and yourself and your work and just all sorts of fulfillment. So whatever, that was a Brene Brown tangent. Big fangirl, clearly. So back to how she would define integrity, which I also agree with. So you don't do what is just fun and easy. You do what is right. You walk the walk, not just talk the talk of your values. So going back to values, knowing your values is important. And I just wanted to talk about this bit about integrity for a moment here, especially in relation to designers, but I think this is probably a good example for everybody. Doing what I've done for a long time now, so interior design and architecture, I've toured a lot of firms, and I've always had it on my heart that community engagement is important. Oftentimes, we exist in a bubble that is apart from the public and those users of our projects that are ultimately like the ones who either benefit the most or really have the hardest time with whatever we create, but we keep them on the sidelines. Ooh, sorry, got a little itch on my nose. Ooh. So this is a common thing. We love a jargony term in design, as I'm sure you all know. I feel like there's so many different labels for design, like biophilic design, human-centered design. It's all great. And one jargony term that we have is community engagement. And essentially that just means choosing whenever it feels right for whatever firm is practicing to bring whoever the end users of said project are into the design process to give their feedback about what it means for their community and how it might affect them. And I love talking to firms about this. I think it's a really great litmus test for my own values in alignment with theirs, because this is something that I care so deeply about. I think we don't involve end users enough. I'm just gonna leave it at that. So for the most part, when I've toured firms, well, actually, hold on. Oh, she's back. So one of the very first firms I toured, I think, is the best example of this, in that I visited and they were a firm that prided themselves on community engagement. But when I actually started talking to them about what that meant in a tangible way, they didn't have a great answer. And even more, they actually started to describe what sounded like a town hall meeting from Parks and Rec. I'm not sure if you all have seen Parks and Recreation. It's one of my favorite shows. It's definitely like one of my all-time comfort shows. So I actually asked the guy, I was like, oh, this sounds an awful lot like the town hall scenes from Parks and Rec. And they were like, yeah, exactly. And immediately I was like, oh, this is not, we're not simpatico here. So that story, I think, is a good foil for this next one I'm going to tell you, which would be a great example for me of also maybe not the greatest integrity, but with the greatest of integrity. So this past summer, I toured a different firm who also, they're not marketing community engagement, but it was clearly one of the pillars of their practice. And I was speaking to a designer there, and they told me about a recent project that they were gonna put a bid in for. It was a public project for a homeless shelter, specifically for families. And there were multiple different designers that were invited to place bids on the project and tour the building. And in this building, there were essentially like chain link fences instead of walls on the closets. So this is a pre-existing building. And the project brief, or like why they were hiring, was to redo it. But like with as little intervention as possible, because of course budgets exist. So when the designer that I was speaking with, touring the firm of, was on this tour, he was kind of like, what is this? You know, this is unacceptable. What message do you think this sends to not only like the adults who are needing to receive the support of the shelter, but what about the children playing around? I mean, it essentially like sends the message that you're no better than a dog. So I think, one, I have an incredible amount of respect for this man and how he was able to voice this in the moment with dignity and grace and compassion. And then this individual went on to say that there was another designer present also putting a bid in on the project, and they raised their own hand, so to speak, in this conversation at the same time and said, like, I don't see what the big deal was. It was probably the least expensive option. So my personal problem with that is it was most certainly not the least expensive option for that shelter to drill, and like even just materials wise, like a chain link fence is going to cost more than some 2x4s and like gypsum board. I could go to Home Depot right now and probably put it up for much less than what they spent for the chain link fence. The message though that sends to the end users of that project has a far greater cost though. I would say that ultimately that is the greatest cost in this. Forget about materials, the message that it sends. And then that individual wasn't, I'm not saying that this person was a bad person by any means. I think it's just important that we all hold each other accountable, because we all get blinders on. And it's hard to see the forest from the trees because we live in such an expansive reality. And there's so many different, like we're all unique. So it's impossible to see how this is gonna affect everybody. But it's important to at least get your values straight and start to live by them. I mean, maybe this individual does have their values straight and this is them living by it, and that's evidence of that. But I think, you know, I'm not a mind reader, and yeah, I mean, I have a great deal of compassion for this person too. I don't personally agree with that take, but yeah, I think that's an important way to think about this, and how the choices that we make internally, like what do we value? Like in this case, I would say I personally value somebody's well-being over cost, to the extent that I could work that into a budget. And like that applies to my life as well. I value my own well-being over taking shortcuts wherever I can. So, you know, usually it's a scalar thing. Like I mentioned in my last video, well, not my last video, but one of my previous videos, I particularly love the author Adrienne Maree Brown. They have a book known as Emergent Strategy. I'm looking at it right now. And in it they say, what is true at one scale is true at all scales. So that's kind of how that translates. So to sum up the internal foundation bit, you see the bigger picture. What would you think about these seemingly unimportant small decisions that you're making now when you're on your deathbed, let's say? Like that's a real great way, but also like kind of a Debbie Downer way, to tap into the bigger picture of what's at stake here, what's going on in your life. How would these decisions stack up against, your values? Are you in alignment with your internal compass? So moving right along, I think the concept also makes a really great designer. So an instructor of mine who I have a great deal of respect for said that if you have a compelling concept, it can withstand like any changes, iterations, and there will inevitably be big shakeups whenever you take an intention all the way through to like its tangible form. Of course, in this case, he was specifically talking about an architecture project, so like a building, but this I really do believe applies to all creative endeavors, and life is a creative endeavor, whether you choose to work consciously with that or not. So I would just ask you, what is the seed you are planting? Because that is your concept. What is the intention behind it? That is also crucial. Having those clear in your mind makes you powerful, a powerful co-creator. And your concept always stems from that internal foundation that you cultivate in yourself, whether you are working consciously with it or not. Again, it is ultimately a passive process. Who you inherently are is always translated into everything that you do. It is always latent in it. Moving right along, we've got not forcing makes a great designer. This is really against the grain of how we're all programmed in our society, especially what I've experienced here in the United States. And I'd like to open this up with a bit of an uncouth, off-the-rail phrase that I love and use all the time when I'm talking to myself and reminding myself that we need to not force things and surrender to what is. Is it the most ladylike? No, but this journey can be incredibly difficult, and I found that adding levity and humor and something a little off the rails helps shake things up internally for me in a good way. So I'm gonna share it with you. I apologize in advance. So there is a saying about love that I actually think, like romantic love, but I really believe it applies to like all life. So whenever I get into these moments where I can tell it feels like there's forcing happening, the saying goes, love is like a fart. If you have to force it, it's probably shit. And I really think that applies to all life. I'm gonna say it here right now on the record. Life is like a fart. If you have to force it, it's probably shit. You heard it here first. So when you are feeling that energy of forcing, it could happen like energetically, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. It feels like you're hitting a wall. It feels dense, frustrating, stressful. I would say that that is a really clear, resounding red flag that something's wrong. Ultimately, as a designer and a human being, you are looking for, and I'm not, don't take this as I'm saying go be a hedonist. That's not what I'm saying here. But I'm saying don't choose suffering, which forcing is suffering. So you're looking for pleasure, excitement, play. You are ultimately looking for the opposite of forcing, which is flow. I would also say cultivating authenticity makes a fabulous designer. Another content creator on YouTube who I really love, her name is Caroline Winkler. She mentioned in a video that was just really about, I think, finding your aesthetic. But I think it really is profound and is a good reminder to me in my own design practice, whether that's my life or my actual projects, whatever it is. I don't remember the exact words, but the sentiment was that good design is supposed to make you feel something. that isn't always necessarily going to be received well. Like, you can't control how other people are going to feel in response to your work. But if you're designing for everybody, you're in reality designing for nobody. Like, taste is subjective. So I would say this applies to all of life: your career, your projects, your businesses, your homes, your life, whatever. If you design for the highest good, though, ultimately, and I'm not talking about like ego-driven good, don't get crazy. I'm talking about like soul-driven, aligned good. You are really designing for the highest good of all, or at least I believe that. Authenticity in your external endeavors, though, really starts with cultivating authenticity with yourself. So some questions to ask is like kind of an authenticity inventory of sorts. Could include like, what are the different masks I put on and in what part of my life do I put these on? What purpose do they serve? Are they really serving me? Are they necessary? How honest am I with myself? I mean, okay, once again, it sounds like I'm creating like it sounds like I'm a really bad influence with what I'm about to say. But if you can't be honest with others, at least be radically honest with yourself. I mean, I do value honesty personally, even with others, and try to cultivate that. But if you don't have that, at least have it with yourself. Your relationship with yourself is the one that you are guaranteed in this life, so you might as well make it a good one. So I'm also a believer, though, that although it is very necessary to do that inner work of essentially the shadow work, and when I say shadow, I mean like the hidden, repressed, unconscious parts of ourselves, not necessarily bad. It is also important to dream and tap into our visionary capacities and add some like fun and flow and zest. So as entry points into that side of things, some potential questions could be, what would an authentic life look like for you? Where you get to follow your own unique compass, where you don't try to force square pegs into round holes. I know I've been I love beating a dead horse. Like a life where you can fly your freak flag in all its glory. I really truly believe that the more of us that do that, the better off we'll all be. Moving right along, we're close to being done here. I think commitment to growth is also a hallmark of a really great designer. And this means that you are, of course, like committed to your own internal growth, but I think it also ties into this idea of forcing and flow that we were talking about earlier. So I would say that commitment to growth also inherently means that you accept that all things are in a constant state of death and rebirth, iteration essentially, including your creative endeavors, but really everything. Stagnancy, which I would argue forcing is a symptom of, is the one true death in this reality. This not only applies to your creative endeavors once again, but everything else too, really. And once again, I'm just gonna bring up my favorite, Adrienne Maree Brown again. What is true at one scale is true at all scales. Finally, although I could honestly talk about this for quite a long time, but I feel like this is a great note to end on. I think accepting that you are not in control also makes you a very great designer. None of us are, spoiler alert. It's really like each of us are driving a self-driving car that is our life. All the cars are on autopilot, not being steered by us. I would argue it's steered by, you know, a higher power, whatever you want that to be. But we're all pretending that we are in control. Or worse yet, we're still trying to steer like madmen, just like white knuckling life. Been there, done that, bought that t-shirt. So I'm not trying to pretend that I'm above this. But I would say that when you surrender to this knowledge, you become something even more powerful, which is a co-creator with the universe rather than just a creator. And I would say that it's more powerful because you're no longer rooted in illusion that you do have control. So I would say that an important element in this, and you feel into it for you, is this concept of choosing power with, which feels much more like, I mean, to me, soul aligned versus power over. And I mean, just as always, I think questions are like the best way to kind of de-rubble some of these intangible concepts in yourself. Just like getting curious with yourself and empathetic and compassionate and being like, why do I want to have power over in this facet of my life? Like, why, what kind of safety am I getting from that? What kind of power am I getting for that? Is it helpful? Does it serve me well? I mean, these are all questions I've asked myself about various things in my life. So I hope that that's a helpful little tidbit for you as well. So of course I will acknowledge it's scary to let this paradigm go. Your ego will most definitely fight you. It's essentially an ego death because your ego is a necessary part of you. It's always evolving with you. You can never get rid of it, but it wants to keep you safe. And when you take away the things that once made it feel safe, it's gonna feel like it's dying, and that's hard. And if that's something that you're going through actively, I would definitely recommend finding support, whether that's in the form of therapy or whatever. But that's, I mean, it's no joke. I definitely find support in that. But know that on the other end of that, there is a light and there is sweet relief. I'm so sorry if you hear Button in the background. She is thrashing the hell out of her Winnie the Pooh Squishmallow. Seems appropriate. So I'll just leave this last little remark on this point. Sometimes like having a reference or a metaphor can really help me in these moments of being curious with myself and reminding myself that this is a process and it's all gonna be okay. And the one that often comes to my own mind when I'm struggling with themes like this is that one scene in Harry Potter in the Chamber of and the Chamber of Secrets, where Ron, Hermione, and Harry are caught up in those vines in the Chamber of Secrets, and they're struggling against it, and just straining and forcing and fighting. And then the second that it occurs to them to just stop and surrender, they are freed. And that's truly what this experience is like, just over and over and over again. So yeah, I think that feels like a good part to leave this off on today. Of course, I would very much love to hear what you think the hallmarks of a really great designer are, whether that's, you know, from the perspective of like somebody who's a designer by profession, or just you are a human being, therefore you are a designer. I'd really love to hear it all. Of course, this is a co-creation. I'm learning from you just as much as you're learning from me, and I am so incredibly grateful for that opportunity. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from you in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, ta-ta.